for change. Vote for your voice counts.
Must go vote in the November elections. Make sure that you're registered so that your voice can be represented in the local, state, and federal government. We can build a brighter future. Go vote!
Make sure to go out and vote so you can wake up in the America that you want to see.
Your voice matters, and you can use it to make real change.
Hey everyone, it's really important that you vote this election cycle.
You'll regret it if you don't. Vote!
This election is probably the most important election of our lifetime, so please don't sit this one out. Vote. Take a friend, take two, take three, but vote. You don't want to regret this.
¿Ya votaste? Que no se te olvide porque tu voto es poder. Recuérdalo.
So we gotta get out there and vote. Now more than ever, our voices need to be heard if we want to make changes that will shape our future.
Everybody make sure to go out and vote because
it will affect all of our future.
Go vote!
Make sure this November you get out and vote. You know, the more our generation shows up to the voting booths, the better it's going to impact our futures. So get out and do the right thing. Let's vote.
Remember to vote. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers, tell your acquaintances, and tell them to tell their acquaintances and their coworkers and their family and friends to vote. It is arguably more important now than it has ever been before. If you do not vote, you will regret it.
Elections belong to the people, to you and me. Our lives, our government is shaped by those who get out and vote, and every vote counts.
We have the power to make a difference, so it's our responsibility to get out there, get our voice heard, and vote.
¿Ya votaste? Espero que no se te haya olvidado. Recuerda que si quieres ser parte de este gran cambio tienes que votar. Vota, no se te olvide.
It's super important that we all come out in November and join together to vote. Please vote. I'll be voting. See you there.
There's so many ways for us to express ourselves and our views, and voting is just one of the most important tools to do just that. So please make sure you're registered to vote and go out and vote.
We have power in our vote. We cannot wake up on November 4th wishing we would have taken the time to go and vote. So make a plan now for when and how you're going to vote. Tell your friends, your family, ask them what their plan is to vote, and make sure you vote this November.
Voting is not only for you. It's for your family, it's for your friends, it's for your future. Please get out there and go vote.
I think it's really important that we all get out and vote and make sure that our voices are heard and that people start to prioritize what the young people think, because it's our future that is in their hands.
Vote in the coming elections because there's a chance you'll regret it later.
Go out and vote, go all the way down the ticket, and make your voice heard.
I don't know about you, but I definitely think some changes need to be made in this country. So I'm gonna go vote, and you should too.
¿Ya votaste? Recuerda que tú eres la diferencia. Tu voto tiene un enorme poder.
You already registered to vote. What are you waiting for? Go out and make your voice heard. Please vote.
Did you know that in 2016, only 40% of 18 to 24-year-olds voted? Let's make a difference this year and go out and vote.
So I encourage you to go out there and vote this November.
If you want change, be that change. Vote, vote, vote.
Vote. You deserve to be heard. Our voices can change the world. It's time to rise up and vote. We deserve to be heard. Our voices can change the world. It's time to rise up and vote.
Welcome to Youth and the Vote 2021. Last year at this time, Pamela Johnson, I'm the president of the WNDC Educational Foundation, and I will say that I'm privileged to be sitting in the Eleanor Roosevelt Library, where we believe she gave some of her radio addresses.
Last year, we got together to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the enactment of the 19th Amendment. And we did it over a course of 3 days. The first year we looked at the history and all of the diverse women who contributed and who struggled for the vote. We celebrated 3 groups of women who have really contributed over 100 years. The Alpha Kappa Alphas, the Delta Sigma Thetas, and the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. They were honored with the Mary Church Terrell Award. And then on the 3rd day, we honored groups that were carrying things forward. And in the tradition of our best tribute is to finish the work that the women, the suffragists began. We invited many voting groups, and many of them are back with us tonight. And so we're excited. We actually agreed that last year that we wanted to get together after the election in 2020 and compare notes. So that is part of what we are doing tonight. I don't think any one of us anticipated that there might be so much to talk about. I want to give some thank yous for the people who put this program together. Truly, Tinsley has done a wonderful job of paying attention to all of the details and really making this happen. Walter Springman, and then the people who really drove this and helped flesh out this concept. Kathy Shuren, Andrea Miller, Rosalind Overstreet Gonzalez, and I should just also mention that the film that we saw earlier was by an Ethiopian filmmaker, Salome Bulageta, who is very interested in our voting system and has done an extraordinary job of documenting. So tonight, we are going to hear from these organizations, and I'm privileged to introduce Rosalind Overstreet Gonzalez, who is the Vice President of the WNDC Educational Foundation, who is going to lead us and moderate this discussion. Ros, let me turn it over to you.
And thank you, Pamela. And I am privileged to be in this position. I thank you. I had the privilege of being here with you all last year. And as I mentioned pre-show, I learned so much more about what needs to be done, what has been done, and what you all are all doing. So thank you for your work that you've done at this time. This is a very interesting program tonight, and you're going to learn a lot. And from some of the people you're going to hear from tonight and some of the organizations are Spread the Vote. We will be graced by Aisha Chapa, Ignite National, Alicia Smith, Votarize, Hope Zitting, Go Koritz, the League of Women Voters Texas, Grace Germain, the Native Vote, Sandra Mitrovich, Vote America, Lori Liniger, Black Voters Matter, Melanie Calhoun, and the People's Agenda. Mary Pat Hector will be in residence with us today. So to get us started off, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. That is none other than Miss Andrea Miller, who graced us last year and who's going to provide us information. Hold on to your seats because she's going to teach you about this process, and she's going to do it in 5 minutes. And that's why her segment is called 500 Years in 5 Minutes. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Rosalind. I had to write this down because, wow, have we been working on preventing people from voting for a long, long time. And so many of these organizations are working on it. So let me make a note of, I'm starting at 5:39, and here we go. When we look at voting in 1788, you had to be white, you had to be male, and you had to own land. In other words, you needed to be rich. In 1866, the Civil Rights Act granted citizenship, but not the right to vote to all native-born Americans. And that would be Indians and also the Chicanos out in the Western United States. In 1869, Congress passes the 15th Amendment, giving African American men, not women, the right to vote. In 1896, Louisiana passes the grandfather clause to keep former slaves and their descendants from voting. As a result, registered Black voters dropped from 44.8% in 1896 to 4% 4 years later. Mississippi, South Carolina, Alabama, and Virginia follow Louisiana's lead by enacting their own grandfather clauses. 1902 in Virginia, Virginia comes up with felony disenfranchisement and adds it to its state constitution. No person who has been convicted of a felony shall be qualified to vote unless his civil rights have been restored by the governor. Senator Carter Glass, who most of us know from Glass-Steagall, made this statement: disenfranchising Black voters with legalism would eliminate the darky as a political factor in this state in less than 5 years, so that in no single county will there be the least concern felt for the complete supremacy of the white race in the affairs of government. In 1920, we moved forward. Women got the right to vote. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. 1940, only 3% of eligible African Americans in the South are registered to vote. Literacy tests and poll taxes basically stopped the vote. In 1965, we saw the civil rights marches on television. We saw peaceful marchers being attacked by law enforcement. And in that same year, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, permanently barring barriers to participation by racial and ethnic minorities, prohibiting any election practice that denies the right to vote on account of race, and requiring jurisdictions with a history of discrimination in voting to get federal approval for changes in their election law. 1970, President Nixon signed an extension of the Voting Rights Act. 1972, Barbara Jordan and Andrew Young become the first African Americans elected to Congress from the South since Reconstruction. 1975, President Gerald Ford signs an extension of the Voting Rights Act. 1982, President Ronald Reagan signed a 25-year extension of the Voting Rights Act. In 1990, the number of Black elected officials in Georgia goes to 495 from just 3 before the Voting Rights Act. In 2006, Congress extends Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act for an additional 25 years. In 2011, restrictions to voting passed in South Carolina, Texas, and Florida, and they are found to disproportionately impact minority voters. In 2011, a record number of restrictions with voter ID laws really started limiting the ability of people to vote. And in 2013, Shelby versus Holder, the Supreme Court crippled one of the most effective protections for the right to vote. In 2016, in Virginia, Governor McAuliffe begins semi-automatic restoration of rights in Virginia. 165,000 people have had their rights restored. However, 140,000 people have no idea their rights have been restored. This year, 361 bills with restrictive provisions in 47 states are introduced, and 29 have passed at least one chamber. We need for the People Act statehood for the 712,000 citizens of DC, the Douglas Commonwealth. And the House just passed the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. So we have a lot of work, and we are still trying to overcome the initial injustice in the Constitution. We will be working on that for years to come. I'm Andrea Miller with Center for Common Ground. We do some advocacy around protecting the right to vote, and during election season, we turn out the BIPOC vote in southern states. Thank you.
Wow, Andrea, that was a rich history, and not only did it illuminate how bad things really were back then, they're not great now, but I am intrigued and I have optimism because a lot has been overcome, even though we still have more work to do. So thank you for all that you're doing to complete the mission.
So welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to move on now to another presenter who's going to provide us with a short overview of where we are today. Good news. And this will be none other than Grace Germain. She is with the League of Women Voters in Texas, and she's going to cover 50 states in 5 minutes. Grace, the floor is yours.
We'll see if I can do as well. Let me see. I'm going to share my screen. So I'll see you in a bit. Hold on. Oh, no. Just a minute. I have to, now y'all can see all my messy screen. So just a second. It was there just a minute ago. Oh, thank goodness. All right. Yay. Okay. Well, thank you for letting me be here today. My name is Grace Germain. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Texas. Our mission is empowering voters and defending democracy. We're a nonpartisan grassroots civic organization that encourages informed and active participation in government. We never support or oppose political parties or political candidates, but we work to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influence public policy through education and advocacy. Our membership is open to people 16 and older of all gender identities. And with 100 years of experience, the League, 101 years of experience, the League is one of the oldest, most trusted civic nonprofit organizations. Go to the next slide. Go to the next slide. Try to go to the next slide. So I was told, and hopefully I got it right, the state of voting rights in the United States, 50 states in 5 minutes. I don't know if I could do it as quickly, but we shall see. So most of this information comes from the Brennan Center, so I put their logo on it just to let you know. I'm not making this up. It's from the Brennan Center. Between January and June, so that's just June. So we've had 2 months since then. At least 17 states have enacted 28 new laws that restrict access to the vote. And restricting access to the vote makes it harder for Americans to register, to stay on the voting rolls, and to actually vote. These are the states that have enacted so far new restricting laws. Let you know that my state, Texas, is doing that today. So exciting. Restrictive voting laws make it harder for Americans to register, stay on the rolls, and vote as compared to whatever it was in their state previously. So keep those states in mind. And I'm going to go to the next slide. Examples of the restrictive voting laws. So just a second. Restrictive law, it is a backlash to the 2020 election historic voter turnout that we had with an unprecedented use of vote by mail usage. That so many of these are vote by mail laws that are impacting how many people can access that type of voting. And it is as though they forgot there was a severe pandemic going on at the time. 12 states will make it more difficult for voters to cast mail ballots, vote by mail ballots that actually count. 8 states made in-person voting more difficult. 10 states imposed new or stricter voter ID requirements. 6 states would expand voter purge practices in ways that risk improper removals. At least 6 states would increase barriers to voter registration. So there you go. Texas can include Texas on that. I'm sure we're going to be on there tomorrow. So some good news. Some of these states have expanded voting laws, or they called the new expansive voting laws by the Brennan Center. Expansive voting laws make it easier for Americans to register, stay on the voting rolls, or to actually vote as compared to what their existing voting laws were before these laws came into place. So visualize these, see where you are. Then let's go to examples of these. Examples of expansive voting laws are in front of you. 6 states made vote by mail easier. Wouldn't that be nice? 4 states expanded vote by mail ballot drop box access or ballot drop off locations. 4 states allowed voters to fix mistakes and defects in their mail ballots. That's called the cure process. 6 states made voting more accessible for voters with disabilities. Washington and New York restored voting rights to people with past convictions. 2 states were made voter registration easier for young voters. New York expanded automatic voter registration to include the State University of New York, and Virginia expanded pre-registration to 16-year-olds. So those are good news. Alarming trends. So these are the things that we all need to pay attention to. The trends that are happening right now, and when I look at these, each one of these is happening in Texas today, at the Capitol. Expanding the powers of poll watchers. Poll watchers are nonpartisan, or the poll watchers are partisan, or they support a certain ballot initiative, and so they're untrained partisan poll watchers are getting expanded powers. They're punishing local election officials for making a mistake. They're imposing criminal penalties on hardworking, patriotic election officials. They're limiting executive and local power so that if they know there's a problem that they can fix it, like there's a pandemic going on, so we need to expand access to voting. They won't be able to do any of that in the future. They're restricting or prohibiting the use of outside funding. So if they really want to decrease voting, they just cut their budget, and then that's all they get. They can't get any funding from anyone else. They're opposing any federal comprehensive democracy reform bills like the For the People Act or the John Lewis bills. That's what these states are doing. And I added this because it wasn't in there, but we're having a huge problem with this in Texas. Is disinformation and misinformation that reduces the trust in our elections. So I don't know if that was 5 minutes, but that's the end. Thank you. Stop sharing.
Well, thank you so much, Grace. For a minute, I kind of thought we were talking about 100 years ago, but at the same time, again, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that's what all of you all are helping us to see. And, we will make a difference. So thank you for that history and looking forward into the future. That was very, very, very good. Thank you. Let's see. And there is something in the chat that there is a link that you can click onto to get more information about what is being discussed. So now let's move on to talk a little bit with the individual organizations about things that they've been doing since last year. Specifically, I'd like to know a little bit more about the lessons you've learned and maybe share your top priorities going forward. So of course, our time is limited. So you'll have a very short time, 2 to 3 minutes to talk a little bit about what you're doing. And so let's start with spread the vote. And that would be Miss Aisha Chapa. And I know that you all have been working in ways to help people get access to IDs. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that and share that with the audience. That may be useful for some of the other organizations.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having Spread the Vote. Definitely join this discussion. So we have actually been out in helping with voter suppression for quite a bit. Originally, we had started with simply helping somebody get an ID for specifically voting, but what we started to see that the ID really affects people in a different amount of capacity depending on which state you're in. Some people do need it for voting rights, and then there's some people who actually need it for in this day and age, vaccine. So really, we started to see that more and more people were starting to reach out to us and contact us for assistance in getting an ID. And it wasn't simply, just the cost of the ID that they needed help with. Some of them encountered issues with birth certificate. If they were from another state, it would require notarization of certain records, going through vital check, things like that. Also, what we did is we reached out to other states and organizations and started to partner with them and really realized that, there was a difference that we could all make in helping somebody really get their life on track, really to either get housing, get a job, just the normal things that we really take for granted with generally having an ID. And, with everything that's going on, I myself am here in Texas. However, we have our entire team all throughout the US. And what we've seen is that, we really have made strides with partnering with recently jails and the youth organizations, and understanding that if one, you're turning of age, voting age, it's very important for you to get educated and understand your voting rights. And then two, those that are in jail that haven't been either one convicted or have a misdemeanor still do really have the right to vote and can do so. So those are the type of channels that we've used with our organization. I'm actually going to show a quick slide if I can share my screen. So really, the way that we found working with the youth here in Texas, primarily, you can really have a college ID, or you can have a ID, but in order to vote, you actually need an ID. A college ID doesn't suffice for actually voting. So really, depending on where you live throughout the US, we started to see that this was a real need. And what we started to do is really educate, working with a lot of the youth and understanding what possible ways we could do in either on a high school platform or even in a college platform to try to see educating the youth on why it was important to vote and gathering the information that was needed to make educated decisions on exercising their rights. And what we're anticipating for the upcoming year, it's ever so important with what's going on with the voter suppression, that we still push forward in doing that. And the way that we do that is, one, we provide the voter guides, but we also are trying to really band together in the best way that we can, given with the certain situations that we're in with COVID, to provide more literature information beyond some of the library databases and things like that, and forums like this to present this information. And it's information is power here at Spread the Vote. And so we strongly believe that educating the youth and providing those tools, especially with social media, being one of the biggest ways to get across to the youth, exercising that in order to see that that really works on the youth level. And most of our volunteers actually aren't lazy at all. They're actually very much wanting to get out there and make a difference. And so we make it kind of a fun activity in having them volunteer with us. We provide the education, access to our volunteer database, and just make it readily available for anybody. And we provide that education on a national level, depending on what part you're in. We allow people to volunteer with us remotely. So it's definitely worked well with us, and we're probably expanding a lot more. We have about 300 plus partnership organizations that work with us. So we've only expanded that further up. I know I brought in El Paso within the past couple of months, and we're really right now in Rio Grande Valley trying to bring in some partner organizations there, working with Goodwill, and basically trying to get out the word about what Spread the Vote actually really does. Hopefully I didn't go too much over my time.
You gave us a lot of information. Texas is a big state, so there's a lot of big things going on with Texas. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna move on, and I'm gonna ask if when you speak at this time that you can specifically address the question of the lessons that you learned in the past year, and then we'll jump back to what are your priorities going forward. So why don't we move on to the next person on the list, and that would be Alicia Smith, and she's with Ignite National.
Yes, thank you. Alicia Smith here, Program Manager at Ignite. Ignite is a nonpartisan organization that trains women to run for office. And our Ignite the Vote campaign was created because we felt like Gen Z, well, they are the fastest growing portion of the electorate. And then the goal of Ignite the Vote was to educate, register, and mobilize new voters. So I'm going to share my screen too, and then continue talking about that. So we ended the campaign last year with a lot of eyes and engagement on the ITV campaign, as well as engagement with our Sophia the Bot, a little cartoon character to help people get mobilized, get engaged, and get registered to vote. And then some of the key lessons that we learned last year as far as mobilizing and engaging young voters was using Ignite the Vote ambassadors. So having people not only spread our mission, but why it's important to get the youth involved. And a lot of that was done through TikTok. I threw a few pictures up there, having people create videos and challenges to keep people involved or to make it fun for young people. Another key lesson we learned was that incentives helped. So like if you could register X amount of voters, you would get an iPad or something like that. And then having like a different prize as they worked up and were registering people to vote. Another key lesson was that a lot of the young people we follow and engage with care about social media influencers. So asking them their favorite influencers and finding out who we could engage in our Ignite the Vote campaign and use them to help us mobilize and register voters. The second to last thing or key lesson we learned was that creating like a National Voter Registration Day challenge where you could participate no matter who you were or whether you were planning to run for office or a college leader or something like that. And then the last thing was our college chapter challenges, because we do have college chapters to help spread the mission of Ignite, but then giving them incentives and challenges for them to register people on campus. So like maybe a $50 gift card or $100 gift card, or just ways to get the college chapters involved and spread and Ignite the Vote. And then those were some of the general or overview of the key lessons that we learned from last year. And then some of the priorities for Ignite the Vote in 2021 is expanding our voter outreach through our fellowship. We'll have about 30 fellows this year. So having them, so adding Ignite the Vote or getting the vote out into their job description, right? And like having them help promote getting people to register to vote and mobilizing people, having them host Ignite the Capitol events, making it fun to be engaged in this process in any way we can. And then the second priority for this year is state-specific outreach, because we have a fellow in, we will have a fellow in 30 states, making sure that they don't forget about our local races or anything state-specific, and then engaging people to meet those needs right in their individual state. So those are two of the general priorities we're going to do for Ignite the Vote. And then we're also still working on it too, right? So they may be more as we plan this out. But I did just want to share those slides really quickly. And then see if there were questions. I can also put my information in the chat box. We don't have a fellowship site in Virginia, but we are involved in Virginia.
Thank you. And I imagine you guys, with us being in the pandemic last year, really got really good at the virtual world. You know, lots of videos, lots of communication in that way, which is how young people communicate. So kudos to you for that. And I'm sure a lot of that information can be shared or will be shared among other groups, because there's a lot to learn there. So thank you, Alicia. Thank you, you and Ignite the Vote. So let's move on to Votarize, and that would be our friend Hope Zitting-Gokeritz, who is going to talk to us a little bit about what her organization is doing, what they've learned, what they would like to see as their top priorities going forward. So Hope, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I feel like I'm among giants here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share my screen just while I go through for accessibility purposes while I talk a little bit about Votarize. For those who don't know, Votarize is actually a Utah-based nonprofit. That's right, Utah has some stuff going on when it comes to anti-voter laws and all of that stuff. Yep, there's a lot going on here. So we're a Utah-based nonprofit, 501c3. And we specifically target underrepresented communities. And in Utah, that looks like women, Black, Indigenous people of color, impoverished communities, LGBTQIA+, and youth as well. So I'll go through this really quickly. So some key lessons that we learned from 2020. And the beginning of the year, we were on the ground registering voters like crazy. But as we know, the word of 2020 was adapt. And so we shifted to some online opportunities as well, too. So one thing that we learned is go where the students are, go where the youth are. And specifically for us, that's 16 to 29-year-olds. And so in Utah, you can actually pre-register to vote as young as 16 and 17. And if you're 17, but going to be 18 on or before General Election Day, you can actually vote in our primaries. So go where the students are. So that included going to high schools, colleges, universities. We were just at Beer Fest last week. All of these events that attract a younger demographic. So go where they are. And of course, create virtual registration opportunities. There were many times that we couldn't go into classrooms during the height of the pandemic and register individuals to vote. And that's very effective for us. Going in, doing it together, it takes like 10 minutes to get like 50 students registered. So in order to, help us get to where we were before, we created step-by-step registration videos that were 5 minutes long that we actually worked with the Utah State Board of Education to disperse through social studies teachers, government teachers, AP US history, and all the teachers that wanted access to them. So that's one thing that we found to be very successful. Another thing when we're talking to younger voters is stress the convenience of registering. It takes less than 3 minutes typically. I know that everybody's voter registration forms are are a little different, but on average, it's about 3 minutes, and that's coming from Rock the Vote. That's who we use for our online and text to register to vote registration opportunities. So it roughly takes about 3 minutes. And we also say to them, okay, if you're not interested, how about we just register you to vote right now? Because registering to vote will give you the choice to vote in the future. So, and most of the time they're gonna vote once they get that ballot. In Utah, we're a full vote by mail state. We've been that way for about a decade now. It's safe, secure, reliable. We love it. Another thing to do is, if you're out there registering people, make it very communal and very personal. You know what? Let's do it together. What's your first name? And start going in at it. Most of the time people won't be like, oh, pull back. It's, again, takes 3 minutes. All right, what's your first name? Come on, we're already doing it. Another big thing we learned as well too is illustrate the tangibles. So sometimes, especially younger individuals, and I fall into this category myself, so hearing from my peers, it's hard to envision what these people on Capitol Hill, whether that's local or national, if they even know about us, and creating that gap between like these special people that are all the way up here and you're down here, and how do we bridge that connection? Really, the biggest thing is to make it about the issues. We know based on studies that 18 to 29-year-olds and up to 35-year-olds, they care about two things much more than other things when it comes up in a survey response. And those two issues are climate change and gun control. So being nonpartisan, we're not going to tell anybody how to vote this way or that way. But, talk about that. Like, for example, in Utah, we have a lot of public lands. Do you love to go hiking? Do you love the Red Rocks? You should vote. That matters. Or student loans, or on the ballot a couple of years ago, we had marijuana on there, and that's a big hit for college students. It's really just targeting your audience and making that tangible. That's the fact that you're here sitting in this classroom in college. Tell me about your student loans, and how that can translate into votes and how it can affect their daily lives. One thing that we also say is, if you want someone to represent you, it's all in the name representative. They work for you. They need to hear from you. You want these people to care about the people you care about. Otherwise, use your vote to vote them out and get somebody who represents you in. So those are a few key lessons that we learned. And I'll go through the priorities for 2021 real quick as well too. Priorities: continue registering and educating. A lot of people, they don't know where to start. It's a voter registration form. It's a government form. There's not even like a picture on there. Like, we want to make it as simple as possible. So we actually, half of our form in Utah is actually not mandatory. And so we only highlight the things that are. And so on average, it takes about less than 2 minutes on a paper form in Utah. So, talking to people, letting them know that if you're somebody who has had a felony conviction, that you can actually register to vote and vote in Utah. A lot of people don't know that because it's a state by state decision, but going into prisons, going into jails, they can be on parole, et cetera, as long as they're not currently incarcerated because they need an address other than a prison or jail, then they can actually vote, and talking to people about that. So then they can tell their friends. We even have some swag. We have buttons that say felons can vote that everybody wears at events. Just educating continually, it never, ever stops, especially with the anti-voter bills that we see popping up. In our legislature, there was one that actually passed. So making sure that we just nip that in the bud and continue educating and registering. A new initiative that is coming up specifically for Voterize, and I can talk to other organizations and individuals about this as well too. We know that election year is kind of an annual thing. Some people don't know. And so that's why we're out there. But in Utah this year, we only have city elections. And of course, those are the ones that tend to get the less noise, less drama, all of that really attracts people to vote, at least some people. So actually nationally, about 1 in 5 voters vote in mayoral elections, 1 in 5. So, we're creating this initiative that actually launches on Wednesday called If I Ran the City, and it's specifically targeted to youth. So how it works is that 16 to 29-year-old Utah residents will submit a 60 to 90-second video on social media. I even created a TikTok for this. Dedication. And they will explain what their top priority would be if they ran the city. And, we have prizes. We're selecting 3 statewide winners, prizes up to $1,000 that really incentivize this age group to submit a video. And not only do they get a cash prize, they will actually get the opportunity to shadow their mayor or city council person for a day or half a day to get a firsthand view of what it's like to actually run the city. So this initiative, of course, we know voting is habitual. And once you talk to a younger person and get them registered to vote and they start voting, it's more than likely that they're going to continue to do that throughout their lifetime. So specifically targeted to 16 to 29-year-olds. And, it requires education. They have to find out what cities even do. And then, of course, if they win, then they get, upwards to $1,000, and they'll get to shadow the person who actually runs the city so they can see what it's like. So that's really to encourage and foster education and importance in the need of city elections. So that's one thing that we have going on, and that actually launches this coming week. So lots of big things, and we don't rest, but it's worth it. Anyway, I'll stop sharing, and thank you so much.
Wow, Utah has it going on. Who knew? Yeah, lots of lessons, lots of good stuff there. Not sure how that would work about being the whole mayor thing here in the District of Columbia, or getting to be that person for the day, but would be very interesting to say the least. So thank you very much, Hope. Let's have another little opportunity to hear from Grace Germain, who is with the League of Women Voters, and talk to us, Grace, a little bit about what you've learned in the past year regarding youth mobilization and what your top priorities are for the next election cycle.
All right, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to press my present mode. Hopefully that'll work. Oh, yay. Okay, so what I was going to talk about today, they said 2 minutes. And I was going to talk about one thing that we do, which is Vote 411, which is our nonpartisan voters guide, which has reached over 1 million Texas voters. Unfortunately, I could see that it comes from all over Texas, that those 1 million people are, but I cannot see their age, unfortunately.
And Grace, if you don't mind me jumping in, 2 minutes is what was projected, but we've kind of combined both of the questions in one. So if you want to, use your full 4 minutes now, go ahead and do that and talk about what you've been doing and what your priorities are now.
Okay, so, yeah, we'll see how it goes. All right, so what we did was we partnered with other organizations, and at first, many people thought, oh yeah, we'll just make our own voters guide, but actually it's very difficult to do. And Vote 411 is super, super easy for folks to use. And it's got a complicated back end, but the user, it's very easy for them. So some of the organizations we partnered with that were especially youth oriented were the Campus Vote Project, which I would recommend, hopefully in all the states. Move Texas, which is another nonpartisan organization that works with the youth, and Texas Educator Votes, because Campus Vote Project and Move Texas work a lot with the youth in colleges, and Texas Educator Votes works with the teachers and the educators and the superintendents and the school boards, and so they're the organizations that are actually in the high schools. And by working with them, because we can't be everywhere, we do have a high school voter registration program and a first vote program, and videos and other things that educators can use. But this gets it out to everywhere by giving those resources to the actual educators. So Vote 411 is actually a trusted and it's a welcoming platform for young voters because it's easy to use on a mobile phone. And as many people know, most of the youth are going to be using a mobile phone here, at least in Texas, in order to access much of this stuff on much of this information. And then another really important item that is super high on my priority list is using plain language, because we get, I don't know what it's like in other states, but in Texas, that when they changed the law for the voter ID law, when they first changed it, it was like a really intense paragraph full of language that nobody could understand, legalese and stuff. And so one of the important things that we do is we take the complicated language and the complicated voting laws, and we change it into plain language so that people can understand what they're trying, what the actual rules are, instead of having to try to decipher legalese. This is offered in English and Spanish and many times in other language. When it's candidate information, it is provided, it is their actual words. They upload it themselves. And so the candidates upload their own language. Most time we don't change anything unless it's just vulgar or really vulgar, or said something really horrible, said something about the other candidate instead of answering the question. And then in Texas, we don't have ballot initiatives, we have constitutional amendments. And so we do a simplified explanation and then pros and cons and all the amendments, the constitutional amendments that are proposed, and then people can vote on them. We try to be very accurate, and we try to provide useful information that voters actually need, especially young voters. And so these are actually some of our interns from a couple of years past that did the constitutional amendment videos. They did a great job with it. Boop. Oops. Okay. So one of the other things, besides making it plain and easy and simple, we tried to make the actual process for most voters, most young voters. This is how simple it is just register, find your polling place, see what's on your ballot, check if you need an ID, and then go vote. And so, yes, each of those things may be difficult in Texas and different than in Utah. We don't have online voter registration, so it has to be filled out by paper with it written down, or it has to be printed. And so there's a lot of obstacles put in the way, but instead of talking about those obstacles, we try to present it in a way that makes it easier and simpler and make sure that everybody's voice is heard. So I'm going to go on to the next one. Obviously, we use youth-oriented graphics in many cases. For this, hold on. So though we take all that information and we try to make it very simple, we also take every state in the United States has got their own voting information, because every state has different laws that they have to follow. And so it also takes those complicated laws in all those states and makes them into accessible and easy for people to understand. Information is provided for each state. So if a young person were to want to find out what's going on in another state, like maybe they were going to college there or whatever, then we would provide this information for them. And so they could go from simple all the way down to the more complicated information. One of the things we're going to update pretty soon is we're going to provide information on how to interact with your local county and state officials. So I think that's going to be pretty exciting. Let me go to the next page. Boop. Yay. All right. So the other question was, what is our top priorities for 2021? And I was just thinking youth oriented. So we're going to try to increase youth voter turnout by using positive peer-to-peer outreach. And so instead of having, we are often at colleges volunteering, but if we could get those students to talk to each other and to do peer-to-peer outreach, then we do this in high schools, colleges, through the workplace, through apartments and housing and dorms, in faith groups, on social media. And I want to really ensure in a huge state like Texas that we don't just work in the urban areas, We work in the rural areas, trying to get all the students, all the youth across Texas to participate in every election, to try to make it simple and easy. Other things we do is we have a text to vote program, because oftentimes, well, I don't know, in Texas, we have a higher voter registration rate, yet a lower actual voting rate. So we have a text to vote program to try to encourage people, get reminders on their phones. Let's see if I have another one, just a second. No, that was my last one. So that is just about Vote 411 that we're doing. And thank you for letting me share.
And thank you for sharing, because as I said, Texas is a big state. There's a lot of big things going on. So we appreciate you sharing what's going on in Texas. I also want to mention that the information about the programs like 411 and Spread the Vote and Campus Vote, excuse me, are all available on the website yourvoicematters.vote. And it can also be found on the WNDC Educational Foundation.org's website. So all those resources are there. So thank you again, as I said, Grace, and let's move on and let's hear from Sandra Mitrovich, who is with Native Vote, and tell us what's going on. What are your lessons learned from the past, and what are your top priorities going forward?
Well, first and foremost, thank you all for having us here today. Myself and my colleague Sierra Watt are going to hopefully share some great insight into Native Vote, our campaign that's been with us since the inception of National Congress of American Indians. It's actually one of our first pieces of resolutions to pass in the Congress to really focus on and work on. And so we're very proud of the work and civic engagement that we've done in this organization in partnership with obviously a multitude of others. One of the areas that we definitely focus on with Native Vote, and especially with NCAI, is the ability to work with our American Indian and Alaska Native people across the country in building youth leadership. We have a NCAI Youth Commission that really focuses on how they can be a part of policymaking around the country. Indian country is young. Our American Indian and Alaska Native population, when we're looking at median age for Native people on our reservations across the country, is about 26 years of age compared to the age of 37 around the nation. And also our American Native population from birth to age 24 years of age makes up about 42% of that total population, AIAN population. So I wanted to throw those out there first, just to say that it's definitely one area for us. We recognize the outreach needs to be strong. In covering our 4 pillars within Native Vote, some lessons learned this year. When we talked through voter registration, our 4 pillars are voter registration, education, election protection, and also data collection. We wanted to really think about how the youth voice is a part of all of those conversations. We have a teacher toolkit, for example, so it's really about making sure that not only is civics a part of our everyday discussion in the community, but also it's a part of our civics in the classroom. We know that in many places and spaces, and I'm sure everyone on this call is very aware of this, in many of our places and spaces around the country, our curriculum is under attack in civics, especially with regard to Native history. Many states, South Dakota, Montana, Texas, have it to strike out Native history. And that's really important for us to think through the education pieces of how we ensure that all of our youth are part of this discussion moving forward. In looking at voter registration drives, we found as part of other things that people have mentioned on this call, we learned that our Native youth want to be a part of all of it. They want to be a part of the social messaging. They definitely are listening to their trusted messengers in the community, but they're also listening to their peers. So around the country, we have Native youth organizations, Center for Native American Youth, United National Indian Tribal Youth, and various other tribal youth councils that many of our youth look up to. And they want to hear from their peers and what they should be working on and doing. So we definitely did do a TikTok challenge. We had many people participate in that, various different Instagram posts, posting, tweet messaging, and others. We hosted a Taking Action series that brought in Native Youth Council representatives and others to talk through the special things that Native youth could do. We saw an influx of Native Youth Councils actually create their own specific missions revolving around Native vote, and also how they could participate in creating their own voter registration drives in their community. I want to pass it over to my colleague, my esteemed colleague, Sierra Watt, whose area of expertise is in data collection as it relates to voting trends across the country for American Indian Alaska Native folks. And she's going to talk us through a little bit about what we also found this past cycle. Sierra?
Thanks, Sandra. Let me share just a little bit about where the Native vote stands in after the 2020 election cycle. There we go. So after 2020, a number of states we found have a significant population of American Indians and Alaska Natives. The Native vote in those areas we can be strategic about because it can often equate the margin of victory in very close elections. Here you can see the top 15 states for American Indian and Alaska Native voting age population percentages. For the 2020 election in terms of the Electoral College, in 7 states, the Native vote was larger than the voting margin percentage, or the difference between the two candidates that determined the winner. That includes 5 of the key battleground states, specifically Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. These results illustrate the way that the Native vote can play an important role in these elections. And the table you see is an excerpt from one of our Native vote data reports. In terms of Native candidates, 2020 was a really big year for the Native vote. We had a record number of candidates running for elections in federal, state, and local elections. In the House, 5 Native candidates and a single Native Hawaiian candidate won their seats, one of which, Deb Haaland, was nominated and confirmed to be the first Native Cabinet Secretary as the Secretary of Interior. And at the state level, 49 American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian candidates running for state legislative office won or ran unopposed. From these results, we learned to not count out locations where we wouldn't necessarily expect Native candidates to be successful. For instance, Kansas elected a record number of Native state legislators, including Native youth candidate Christina Hasswood, as well as one of the House representatives, Sharice Davids. And so you can see the list of Native candidates who won their elections on the screen, as well as the House representatives. Now I want to turn it back to Sandra to talk about some next steps moving into 2022.
Thank you, Sierra. One of the things that we definitely love about our team at NCAI, as you can tell, we have a dedicated person in our Policy Research Center that's always making sure that our data is telling the story, and that's super important to us. We're very thankful for that work that they do. We also have a policy team that focuses on looking at legislation and moving forward and what we can do. We already talked and heard from various different acts and voter suppression. We have a team that is focused on that as part of our Native American Voting Rights Coalition. I will drop in a link here in a few minutes about the upcoming legislation as it relates to the Native American Voting Rights Act that we have introduced in this August with our Native American Voting Rights Coalition under NARF. So that's moving forward. Those priorities are addressing head on, of course, in support of HR 4 and really looking at how we can get involved in always voicing across the country to be a part of that public record. That's one area that our youth, sometimes are a little bit unsure of what they can do. And we're always constantly reminding them, yes, you need to be a part of that public record in every place and space. It's also more about, somebody mentioned this earlier, it's also about our local elections, right? I know we can get caught up sometimes in certain cycles. Our Native youth can also participate in, as they come of age, depending on their tribe, within their sovereign government, they can participate in their tribal elections. So we remind them, don't forget about your local elections, your tribal elections. You can participate in this and get involved. When surveying our youth coalitions, because we have Native vote coordinators around the country that sign up and volunteer to be these coordinators for their communities around the country from every tribe and also organization, our youth spoke to us about really making sure that we don't forget them in the conversation. They want to be at the table. They also kind of talked about that they want to start defining what civics means in their community. They also asked that they want to message to their families that even though they're not of voting age yet, so our younger Native youth that are in these coalitions said, I may not be able to vote yet, but I want to stress to my family how much it's important they vote, because what they vote on is going to affect me. And so how can we remind our families to message that, our adult voters and our families to get out there and vote, because it's actually more about the family and community to be that voice. And then last but not least, they really wanted to make sure that we heard the message about continued training. That we heard from one Native youth, they're part of a youth caucus that formed actually just this past year. And they talked to us about training. They said, I know sometimes you think maybe we don't want to be in the classroom all the time, but really we enjoy the trainings and we want to be a part of the conversation and know how to give testimony. So definitely we don't want to forget them in making sure that when we're creating these materials and our resources, that they are part of that development as well. So I know those are all going to be priorities moving forward, and we definitely will continue with data reports. Obviously, most of us are in the thick of redistricting right now. The other connection I don't want to forget, and I want to stress, this past couple of years, we were able to find that stronger connection between census, voting, and redistricting, and putting all the pieces together for our communities. We really don't want to lose that momentum. We want to see that going into 2022 and moving forward. So I'll end there. I'll put the links that I just mentioned about the Native American Voting Rights Act in the chat. If you're able to uplift them in your organizations in the social media toolkit, we would appreciate it. And we just want to say thank you for all the work that you do in making sure that our voices are stronger in this space.
Thank you, both Sierra and Sandra. Great information, and actually just an example of what advocacy, voting, staying focused can turn out, with the Native American persons who are now holding office and who are in the position to make policy and make decisions that will affect not only Native Americans, but all Americans. So thank you for your work, and we will be following you. I'm going to move on now to another group who is with us, and that is Vote America. Vote America is being represented today by Lori Linegar. So if you could talk to us a little bit about what's going on in your group, what lessons you've learned, and what are your priorities going forward for 2020. The floor is yours.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me today. It's great to be amongst this incredible group of women. So Vote America this last year really ties into a few things that have already been said by ladies on the panel today. One is our 500 years in 5 minutes clearly recognize that we have some systemic issues in the way that we have a voting process in America right now. There are some things that need to change that can make this more efficient and cost effective. But also tied to that, something that Grace had mentioned is that we actually have a turnout problem in this country as well. And a big part of that is recognizing that in reality, we're spending a ton of money to register voters. And because of this very complicated process, we're overspending on registration, underspending on get out the vote efforts. And ultimately what that does is reduce our electorate, which is not an ideal scenario. So looking at last year, we spent a little time self-reflecting and doing some research, and we found ourselves really upset about the fact that we realized that our organizations are spending like $100 million to register voters. And we were just thinking, can we find a faster and more cost-efficient way to make this happen? So a key part of what we did last year was we decided to run a pilot in a way with a brand partner in hopes to do a one-to-many approach and reach more people at once. So we ran a pilot with Credit Karma, where we integrated our tools and our API, which I guess I should have started Vote America. We do voter turnout and voter registration nationally, but key for us is utilizing technology and tools. So the baseline of our work is that we have a robust set of voter engagement tools online, so you can register, verify your registration, vote by mail tools, find your polling place, pledge to vote, and sign up for election reminders. And so we partnered with Credit Karma, and we were able to work with their tech team to build our voter tools into the pre-existing workflow of Credit Karma. So any Credit Karma user would go in to check their credit score, but they'd get put a voter roadmap in front of them, asking them to check their registration, and then it would walk them through the process of everything they needed and eventually sign them up for reminders from us so that we could send them the information needed to vote, which, if anything, 2020 taught us, it's that voter education, which is get out the vote efforts, is incredibly important in a year where things are pivoting and changing. And what that partnership allowed us to do was, in less than 3 months, reach 600,000 voters and put them through the process of verifying their registration, registering to vote, requesting vote by mail ballots, finding their polling place, and more. And really the lesson learned here is that by capitalizing on our partners and existing network of users, we are able to reach more voters in a more cost-effective way. And the other lesson learned is that sometimes if we take a step back and think about things differently, voter registration is just paperwork. And so is stuff like banking and whatnot. So if we can build more paperwork in the places people are already doing paperwork, that seems very aligned. So our goal and our strategy moving forward is that we want to take that and we want to pivot it to the angle of the fact that we know that studies show that voting's habit forming. The best predictor of how often you vote is what age you voted first. And we have a very large population of individuals turning 18 every year. So we want to build voter engagement into the systems where our young people are already filling out paperwork, where they already are. They're a digital friendly population. So we would love to figure out what's the one-to-many space to reach the 15 million high schoolers in the United States, all of the young individuals going to colleges. Can we knock out the voter registration problem so that we can focus all of our efforts on voter education, get out the vote, and wipe this issue off the map while we work on systemic change? What that might look like is talking to college prep tests, certification programs, all of the high school and college learning management systems, class registration systems. What are the places where these young kids are already filling out paperwork, and can we just put a little voter engagement right into that pathway? So that's what we're really working on this year and what we're hoping to get to. And if we can get a good enough population, what we'd really like to do is build some research into this and really look at if we get a large number of young voters and we put research behind how many elections after they turn 18, we remind them to vote to turn them into lifelong voters, that we can prove that if we just get these young people engaged early on, we don't have to work so hard for the rest of their lives. So that's our learning lessons and goals right now. Dream big, I guess.
That is a very lofty goal, but one that is very attainable. And sounds like maybe there's a little collaboration that could happen with Ignite National and maybe some TikToks and some things that turn into youth engagement. So I applaud you for what you've done thus far. It sounds fantastic, and I'd love to see the outcome of the research when you do go down that road and satisfy that endeavor. So thank you.
There's
been some great information today. So thank you, Lori. Next, our next presenter is going to be that of Melanie Calhoun, and Melanie is with Black Voters Matter. So Melanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to listen and learn and also present our lessons learned from 2020. BVM, our goal is to increase power in our communities, and effective voting allows the community to determine its own destiny. 3 of the takeaways from 2020, I would say first, the approach is critical. We've learned that our approach to especially the youth, that is critical and essential in order to engage the younger future voters or young voters, our approach can't be the normal, our ancestors fought and died for our rights. That doesn't seem to resonate with younger voters. So in essence, we have to meet them where they are and engage them around the issues that are important to them, and then subsequently tie those issues to the importance of their ballot. Currently, here in Georgia, we're hosting virtual listening sessions throughout the state. And this allows, the community to come in to voice their concerns. And this data will ultimately help us to better direct and inform the work that we do in the future. Secondly, it is essential that we engage young people in all aspects of program planning, strategic planning, development, implementation, and evaluation, and provide training on how to effectively develop the youth-adult partnerships. We must create opportunities to for both adults and youth to share decision-making and to be sure to identify specific roles based on age and prior experience. Thirdly, if we really want to truly capture the attention and imagination of the younger voters and future voters, we need to approach them with fresh, new, relevant methods. It is critical to think outside of the box when it comes to the younger voters and future voters. For example, last year, Black Voters Matter in the state of Georgia across several counties, we hosted what we called a collard green caucus. And we gave out collard greens, but we also pushed a message. So you have to think outside of the box and not just do those normal things that people in general would do, that when a person turns 18, they're automatically informed or conscious citizens and active voters. But we need to understand that young people receive implicit and explicit messages that have lasting impacts on their future engagement. So we must play an active role earlier on in their lives, in the lives of these future voters. Research has continued to demonstrate that the preparation of these young people that they receive is inadequate in regards to the election systems and civic engagement. Power is constantly being withheld from young people, which limits their political environment, their political involvement. Saying that low voter turnout among young voters means that they're simply apathetic ignores the structural and systemic obstacles that civic participation, that they face in their civic participation. As far as Black Voters Matter and our top priorities for the coming year, I will lead by giving a quote from one of our fearless leaders, Mr. Cliff Albright. He stated that what makes the voting rights battle so important isn't just because the process of voting itself, but it's because it's the very thing that lets us get the other things on our agenda. And that's why voting rights are so important. And that is one of our top goals, our top priorities is the expansion of the Voting Rights Act through the passing of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and S1 before the People Act. And currently right now, our leaders are in DC, and on this weekend, we will be engaged in the DC Make Good Trouble rally. BVM is standing in solidarity with our friends at Transformative Justice Coalition to demand the federal government provide protections for our rights to vote. And specifically here in Georgia, our goal is to educate the community on SB 202, which is simply put a voter suppression bill. But we want to make sure that they are equipped with all of the knowledge, information, and resources they need to be able to ensure that their vote counts in spite of the voter suppression tactics that are employed, and to continue to work with our grassroots partners in the communities that we work in order to build their power and build their capacity. And I thank you all for just this opportunity.
And Melanie, I want to thank you for that, for those nuggets. And, Georgia has shown the world how it's done. So I have no doubt that, you will reach those goals, that those young people will realize the power that they have. Persons like you will continue to encourage them, and you'll continue to be an example for what voting can accomplish if we all vote, or when we all vote. So thank you. Thank you so much for that. And last but not least, we're joined by Mary Pat Hector, and Mary Pat is with the People's Agenda. So Mary Pat, if you can share with us what the lessons that you've learned and what are your priorities going forward. And then we'll have one last person come and bring it all home and talk about what's going forward. So thank you.
Thank you. I want to bring everyone greetings from my boss, Ms. Helen Butler, who unfortunately cannot be with us today. But my name is Mary Pat Hector, and I serve as the Black Youth Vote Coordinator underneath the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. And one of the things that we've learned from 2020 is, one, the importance of engaging youth and placing them in leadership roles in order to do this work. I myself am a college student, and underneath the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda and all of our offices, we have 7+ across the state of Georgia. We ensure that young people were hired to lead this work in both full and part-time positions. So that is just one, right? Ensuring that young people are not only helping us by volunteering, but are also at the table. I think our friends at Black Voters Matter did speak about that prior to. Also, everywhere we've never been before, we went. Like, that is one of the biggest things that we wanted to ensure. We didn't want to just do organizing as normal, right? We wanted to go to the nightclubs. We wanted to show up to where the latest Jordans or the latest Yeezys were dropping, and we knew there were going to be 500 young people in line. We wanted to be there. We also knew that some of our colleagues were not able to go into the field because we were still in the middle of a global pandemic. And so what we did was we had a Gltv voting tour where we put our young people at GCPA on vans. Of course, we ensured they were tested and they were safe, but they did info drops, right? And we didn't only just do info drops in the Metro Atlanta area. We took them to Athens. We took them to Savannah. We went into all of those rural communities where there wasn't a lot of outreach being done. And we wanted to ensure that we were still, knocking on those doors, not necessarily coming into contact with people, but just leaving these things at their doors. And then also just ensuring that we were engaging community when we were doing our community give backs. One of the things that we did is whenever we would do Gltv, again, we knew we were in the middle of a global pandemic. We ensured that there were grocery cards. This is something that we just gave out to everyone in the community just to ensure that they were safe. And we also provided everyone in community with food trucks. This is something that people could get whether or not they registered to vote or not. We just wanted to ensure that we were, acknowledging a need specifically in Black and Brown communities, because we understood that they were lacking access to food, things like toilet paper and other things, because we, again, were in the middle of a global pandemic. We had concerts in partnership with organizations like Headcount, car concerts, right? We knew we couldn't come into contact with people, but we wanted our partners who were willing to kind of donate their time and their talent. And so we partner with giant organizations like Headcount to ensure that people were able to still go to concerts and, of course, register to vote. We also took over Twitter hashtags. I'm so sorry, you all, if you see my dog jump in the middle of the camera. I don't know, he's running around like a crazy person. So yes, we also took over Twitter hashtags and things like Reddit. A lot of people, don't necessarily think about, okay, kids are at home, they're on Twitter and TikTok 24/7, and every time they post, they're going to utilize a hashtag. Most of the time when hashtags are trending, that's when young people are going to look at them the most. Well, we're taking them over. Every time you see someone talking about a trending topic, you're also seeing, hey, are you registered to vote? Hey, do you want to register to vote? Hey, do you know where your polling location is? Just to ensure that they're constantly getting the information. We also have the Black the Vote program, which is a program that we trained students to become poll workers, become election protection monitors. We trained students on how to, ensure that people within their community were registered to vote. We trained them on how to register voters in the state of Georgia so that they can get this information. And Black the Vote was specifically designated for students of color at both historically Black colleges and universities and predominantly white institutions. Through our Black the Vote program between 2020 and 2021, we were able to train over 500 students in the state of Georgia. And we also were able to provide those students with stipends for their time because they spent hours in training of $200, between $200 and $250. We also began the Black Youth Vote Fellowship Collective, where we hired more college students. Currently, we have college students at all of the historically Black colleges and universities in the state of Georgia. And that particular fellowship collective is consistently growing. And you know, what is our priority for 2021? Again, it's just engaging and mobilizing young voters, doubling back. Like, yes, we came in contact with you all in 2020. Yes, you all showed up. The state of Georgia had the largest youth voter turnout rate in this country. And you know what? We need to see that energy again in 2022. So we're doubling back. We're calling you again. We're knocking on your door again to ensure that you're engaged. We're expanding our youth initiatives. We are also starting early, right? We're not going to wait until January of 2022 because that's a huge election year. Literally, we've been doing the work and we're doing the work right now. And then also just engaging more in social media, you know, with our organization being a more seasoned organization, just trying to grow our social media presence, whether that's on TikTok. Again, I mentioned Reddit, I mentioned Twitch, like every new, even Clubhouse. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with Clubhouse, but we were even having Gltv conversations via Clubhouse. Like any way in which there was a young person, we want to be there. And we understood the importance of no voter, like every vote counts. Again, I mentioned we're going to the clubs, okay? And we're going to do it again. We're going to the gym shoe drops. Everywhere we think there's going to be a young person, we want to be there. And we really want to make it practice for us as an organization to ensure that, you know, we're not just going to community centers or colleges, right? We have to kind of think outside of the box to engage young people and voters that a lot of people just don't think about.
That's awesome. And again, Georgia is representing and showing us how it's done. So we appreciate you, Mary Pat, and I can hear your excitement and your exuberance. And I'm sure that's infectious and contagious and brings the other youth aboard. And as for your dog, I just want to say that today is National Dog Day. So it is his day and it is fine for him to make his cameo, you know, so happy National Dog Day to everybody else who has a dog. So we are almost out of time, but I don't want to have you leave without hearing a wrap up from our guest, Kathy Sharon. Kathy, the floor is yours.
Good. Kathy works. To
engage the audience and keep them involved going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, this is really hard to be last after all of these fantastic presentations. I am really a little intimidated, but okay, here we go. I want to just give you a little list, not in any specific order, not by priority. Some are questions with no answers, but things for us to start thinking about. Because, you know, we barely had time to catch our breath, right? And we are, as everybody has said, we're right back in at it full time. So thinking to getting ready for spring and summer 22, those primaries are going to be here in a blink. I bet we have all gone to voter registration things and said, you registered to vote? You're all registered to vote, right? I want to change that question to, is your voter registration up to date? Because we don't want any glitches coming along. Oh, yeah, I registered 5 years ago and I moved since. And in DC, for example, even if you've moved apartment number in your building, you need to update that, or you've changed your name. All of those things, or you want to change your party affiliation, whatever, you have to change that and update it. So I want to change that question from, are you registered to vote, to, is your voter registration up to date? First of all, it implies that you think they're smart enough to already be registered to vote. You're not presuming that they're dunces and have been sleeping through the last, 5 years or whatever. So that's I think number one on my list. I said there were no priorities, but that really is, I think that's going to be my main push going along. I want us to all think about how we're going to deal with COVID fatigue. Another election cycle, probably with masks, with social distancing. Add to that all this voter suppression nonsense. I was going to say a different word, shorter, 4 letters only. But, you know, we're all feeling it, and so is the voter. I also want to ask, how are we going to deal with all this text and email fatigue? I know in the last campaign, if I got one more text message or one more email asking me to vote or to give money, I was going to throw my phone out. I was going to threaten not to vote. I mean, it made me nuts, right? And I wonder where that tipping point is. And I want us to be cognizant of it and aware of it. And maybe it's less so for young people, but certainly for us old coots, there's a point where I think we have to be careful. I want to think now about the challenges of working while remaining nonpartisan, particularly as partisanship becomes so much more ingrained in and contentious. So now take time now to look at your organization's policies, remind your volunteers, include guidelines in all your voter registration events, trainings, and all of that. You don't want to put your 501c3 status at risk. The silver lining in all of this is that voter turnout usually goes up in contentious races. For all the research we do and all the tracking, bottom line is if it's a contentious race, people do turn out. I also want to remind us that the issues are not partisan, and it is not partisan to hold your elected officials accountable. So remember that as we do our messaging through this whole build up to the primaries. Also, and this has come up already today, was let's be clear about how to combat mis and disinformation, to be able to recognize it and combat it. And actually, it's pretty simple. Generally, no oxygen. Just remember, no oxygen is the best strategy. So don't repeat the mis or disinformation while you're trying to dispel it. Just state the facts and pivot to your core message, but no oxygen to any of this nonsense that's coming up. Also, and this has come up again also tonight, is build the bench. Let's focus on local elections, because that's where decisions that affect people really are made. And for the organizations that are working with candidates as well as new voters, it's there, you know, you can hold those local elections right in your hand if it's your town, if it's your county. So it's a great way to engage people. We've talked a lot about this, of course, is build the base of new voters, high school voter registration, college campus registration. Be careful on the college campuses. There are some regulations sometimes for students to keep their home state registration so that they can keep their state-funded scholarship money. So we may want, for example, kids, you know, I'm here in DC and I go on campus to register voters. Of course, I want them as DC voters. This is their new home. Many kids stay in DC after school, but many are from out of state. You don't want them to lose their scholarship. So be aware of those questions for your voters. I want to talk about Vote 411. You've heard a lot about it, but it is a Webby award-winning site. It is nonpartisan. You've heard a lot about this already tonight. But any US address, you can just plug in the address and get all the information you need. So it's great fun. I can be on Zoom or on the phone with my aunt in New York or my friend in California and sit and talk with them about their candidates, about the issues on their ballot. So it's a nonpartisan, trusted source. And the other piece that I want to stress about Vote 411 is for those of you who work with candidates, getting their information up on Vote 411 is really critical. The feedback we get from candidates is really very positive, and it's the one place where people can go for solid, nonpartisan information. And like Grace was saying, in Texas, we too ask questions of each candidate in DC for each office. We work hard on making those questions non-leading in any way. It's hard to write good questions, right? So we're really thoughtful about that. And we don't edit their answers. You can learn a lot from a candidate who doesn't even respond, right? You want to vote for somebody who doesn't even care enough to do that. And from those who respond and maybe have bad grammar or bad spelling and all of that. It's like, really? Anyway, encourage your candidates to fill out that questionnaire that comes from their local league on Vote 411. Of course, we know, based on this, that working in coalition builds strength. Those of us working in this increasing voter engagement space, we're not in competition with each other. We strengthen each other. So events like this that build that coalition are incredibly valuable, and we can't do it enough. The ideas that we shared, the ways that we can partner, the ways that Vote 411 might tie into something and take that burden off of what you're doing, the way we can share research and data, all of that is incredibly, incredibly helpful. We talked about this also tonight, to build on the notion of trusted sources. So yeah, maybe kids are hearing things at school, maybe people are reading the newspaper, but we know there may be issues there too. But the PTA moms, the soccer moms, listen to each other. Teens listen to each other. And we need to build on that base of teens and young people who are the trusted sources for each other, and make sure they have the tools to be say worthy of being that trusted source, you know, that they are sharing good information. I also want to make sure that we're not continuing to overlook folks who are on the fringe, returning citizens, non-English speakers, disabled, other groups that we've talked about tonight as well. And to say that everything's changing. This is recorded. By tomorrow, there's going to be a different set of constraints in Texas, for example. It's all, every minute, things are changing. So we have to stay on top of all this. So bottom line, we're preaching to the choir here tonight, that's for sure. But we all, each of us individually and certainly together, have enormous power and influence. So let's use it. Let's use it to make sure that everyone has the tools to vote, gets out there and then actually votes. That's the only ticket we have to electing officials that reflect our values. And I can't help but say something about this sign that's behind me. DC statehood has to be part of this effort. We also need and deserve voting representation in Congress. And even tonight, it started out, Andrea mentioned DC statehood, I'm all excited, but we even called this 50 states in 50 seconds or something, I don't know. Where was I? Hanging out here, no voting representation. Let's be careful about that. So don't disenfranchise DC when you talk 50 states. We're trying to get to 51, but in the meantime, we still are the District of Columbia. It's my pet peeve. When you are doing things like call your representative, call your senator, put a little asterisk by representative or senator, and then a corresponding message with the asterisk that says there are 700+ thousand of us in DC who have no representative or senator to call. And then you can put a link to the League of Women Voters DC for statehood information. Or if you want other links, I'm happy to provide them. And in closing, I'm just going to give you a quote from Judge Edith Sampson. She was the first African-American delegate to the UN. She was appointed on the 25th of August, so yesterday, in 1950. And it's when Eleanor Roosevelt was at the United Nations. I have a wonderful picture of them together. So we started out in the Eleanor Roosevelt room at the WNDC facility here. So it's appropriate that she comes up again at the very end. And she said, "The doors have not been opened, but they have been unlocked. If we press against them, they will open." I'm going to say, press hard, and keep pressing until our democracy works for all of us. So get out there, get these kids voting, because we're counting on them. And if anybody can do it, it's the group on this Zoom call. So thanks for being here tonight.
And Kathy, thank you. And I will add to your quote by saying, and if you press and they still don't open, just take them off the hinges. Just remove the doors altogether. You know?
Well done.
Yes.
Just thank you so much to everyone. What an extraordinary group of organizations, what an extraordinary group of women. It's sometimes depressing to think that this has taken 500 years and 100 years, but we have a lot of energy and a lot of talent and genius and commitment. And I asked Roz whether, do we say, let's meet again next year? Maybe we should, because I bet we'll have even more to share. Thank you and good night.